Hello and welcome to the Existential Stoic Podcast, episode 18. I'm Danny. I'm here with Randy.
Hey, Danny.
Hey, Randy. And today we're going to talk about comparison, the death of happiness.
Ooh.
Something died.
Happiness.
And it was happiness. That should be like the slogan for the United States.
Yeah.
Something died, happiness.
My career.
Yeah.
So today is a pretty poignant episode because a lot of people want happiness nowadays.
Most people, I would argue, want happiness. And you know what's interesting? Most people have always wanted happiness.
Really?
Yeah, even when you look back...
You're telling me this isn't a new thing that started in 2020 with COVID?
I don't think so, no. Even in these trying times. Yeah. No, it's interesting because, you go go back and look at these ancient philosophers talking, writing about ethics and the good life, and they were interested in happiness. They were interested in successful lives and well-being, which I think, it depends on how you interpret happiness, but hey, it works, right?
Yeah, well-being and happiness. Actually, there's a book that I was reading that I've been talking about a whole bunch, talking about happiness, but also well-being because it's more measurable than just happiness. You can't really measure smiles and such, but you can measure well-being.
Yeah, it's funny. I think we tend to, when you look at, different psychologies and philosophy, I think we tend to interpret happiness in, at least, the normal person as sort of, they equate it with, pleasure and being in a pleasurable state.
Totally.
And so, they think of, a happy life as being, feeling good all the time. You always say, rainbow shooting in your ass, right? All this bullshit.
That's what it is, yeah.
And it's that's not life, though, because life has changed. Life has all this other stuff going on, and it would be weird to be in that state constantly.
It really would.
I mean, that's complete
Well,
hedonism.
even if you were
almost.
in that state constantly, you would get used to it. Because we get used to whatever. And so if you were in that state all the time, that it would become normal, and then you'd be like, oh, I need more.
Well, that's just it, right? You'd always need to up the ante in order to actually get the same amount of pleasure. It's similar to even, suffering and pain, right? If we're in a state of pain or suffering, we will adjust to it. And it starts to feel less burdensome over time as we get used to it. So it's the same way, I think. And so I think, that's part of the problem is, what is happiness and well-being, I think, captures it better. Like you said, it's measurable. It's more about, doing well, succeeding, positivity, optimism, right? These things that help us live life and embrace and face the challenges of life, right?
So why, then, is comparison the death of happiness?
Yeah, I know, right? It does kill it.
I want to bring it back to this example I bring up all the time. When somebody asks me, no, really, how are you? Are you happy? Because until that moment, I was happy. But then at that moment, they ask me a question that makes me compare what I'm feeling right now with some memory. And then I'm like, shit.
Fuck. Now I have to think. It's funny, though, because, I like that example, too, because it's really right, you're in the moment. You feel good, you're doing well, things are going well, but as soon as
or even if you don't feel good, you don't feel terrible because you're not comparing what you're feeling with some
exactly,
other thing.
right? Yeah, you're not making a comparison, you're not trying to evaluate it. You're just being, right? And then somebody comes along and asks you, that forces you to reflect, make a comparison, and of course, here's the thing with comparisons, there's always something better. I mean, that's the problem with comparisons, is there is always theoretically a better state. So, are you happy? Well, I don't know. I could be doing better, right?
But so here's the other thing about comparison. It really boils down to what you're comparing to.
Oh, it most certainly does.
And so one word for comparison that I like, that's kind of a similar word, but for me it has a much better connotation, is perspective.
I like that.
Yeah, because comparison, we think of keeping up with the Joneses, or at least this is what goes on in my brain, and I think everybody else thinks this way because I
think this way, and damn it, that's how the world is.
Clearly.
What the fuck?
Yeah, clearly. So, comparison, I think keeping up with the Joneses.
Okay.
Comparing how much money I make to them, what car I drive with them. But perspective, I take a look at how fortunate I am compared with everybody else in the world. Just being able to live in the United States. Sure, we may have our issues, but you're living in the wealthiest nation the world has ever known. And just being alive, 99.9% of the people who have ever lived are dead. Just being alive, having that perspective of how fortunate you are, it kind of changes my viewpoint when I think perspective as opposed to comparison.
Well, you know what I hear there too is comparison. You're talking about kind of looking at what you lack based on the external, right? So comparison, when we say comparison, we're talking about making a distinction, almost like a pro and con between one thing and the other. Perspective sounds more like gratitude, grateful, you know, looking at it differently, looking at it maybe positively, right? But it's interesting too, right? Because, you know, either way, and it's like, I'm glad you mentioned that it is like almost another word for it, because you're still making a comparison, right? In one, you're looking at what do I lack compared to those who have more, to the where the grass is greener, versus how am I compared to the broad, you know, grouping of individuals or humanity. And it's interesting because, you know, why do we always have to do that? Why does comparison come up so much? Why do we need to always sort of evaluate and kind of see ourselves relative to everything else? You know, it's an interesting kind of problem.
Maybe because the first mistake we make is thinking that there's an us and a them.
That could be it, right? Yeah, that could be a big one.
Like, aren't we all theoretically just stardust?
Yeah, damn it, we're all energy, stardust, whatever you want to call it, you know? I mean, we're all the same fundamentally. And, you know, it's funny because comparisons assume that there is a larger purpose, a larger meaning. It assumes there's something, right, that can ground the comparison or make the comparison make sense. It's almost funny because it's like, well, okay, if you're comparing it based on, like, income, why does that matter? What does that mean to you, right? I mean, like, is it meaningful to you to make these comparisons at all, or are they just harmful in general? I mean, what is the point of making it? But yet we do it all the time because I think, you know, especially in our society, we are in a way like encouraged to, because of, you know, advertising, consumerism, the idea that, you know, you can display to the world your worth through your possessions or your income, because money is the great equalizer in the sense of evaluations, right? That's the way we look at it. But we've talked about this before, right? Using money as sort of the objective standard for value is problematic in a lot of ways. I think it sort of, you know, it undermines a lot of things that are fulfilling, have quality, and have meaning to the individual.
Yeah, comparing GDP or money with well-being, they're actually inversely proportional once you get to a certain amount.
Yeah.
Like there's a certain amount where, yes, an increased GDP can provide more food for people, more resources for people, more happiness. But then when you start getting to societies like these affluent societies like in Japan and United States and Germany, guess what? Every time someone commits suicide, GDP goes up. Every time someone has a divorce, GDP goes up. And so it's inversely correlated because these things that are still producing money aren't producing more well-being. They're not making society better.
Well, yeah, and I think this is the problem, right? Because it comes down to what we're focusing on. It comes down to what is valuable to us. And I think really having a skewed perspective or a skewed understanding of what we need in life, right? If we're only thinking in terms of money, if we're only thinking of what we lack, we will be unhappy. Those comparisons are always going to be negative, right? So the question is, right, how do we, if comparison's always getting us there, and we've talked about this before with social media, you have all these curated lives, you're seeing this like very skewed side of things with everybody representing the best of the best. And it's like easy to get upset and negative looking at that all the time, right? Because you feel like you lack all the time. I don't have that. My life's not good. I don't have $1 million. My life's miserable. I didn't make $27 billion in the first week like Elon Musk of 2021. I must be failure, right? I must be doing something wrong. And it's like when you look at it that way, there's no way to win. Because there's always somebody who has more, right? There's always a better situation. I mean, I think in that case, and it makes it problematic. So, I mean, you know, comparison really does hinder us.
I wonder why the default comparison is lack. Is that just like a trick of the mind? Is it a faulty mental model, or is that something that benefited us biologically over time, so that that became the default? Because, for instance, the reason I asked that question is because it's so much easier for our attention to get trapped by bad news than good news. That's why news networks are just these like terrible, sensationalist things that just happen nonstop.
Swamps.
Yeah, because they just they catch our attention. And so, but biologically, those are the people who survived, because if you were out there alert in nature, you saw the predator coming and you were able to evade it or kill it. Whereas if you were just happy and thinking of all the good things in life, watching rainbows, then guess what? You die. So biologically, there was some benefit to us being aware of all the bad things. But in the same way, was there some biological benefit to us having a lack in comparison? I guess maybe it's kind of like the desire to keep going forward. Like, life produces life, and there's some inherent desire that must be necessary to create more of that. So potentially there's a little bit of a lack, because if you feel like you're lacking something, you're going to be more driven to go after it.
Oh yeah, that's interesting, right? So the idea that, we see this a lot too. You look at like Socrates makes the point, right, that or Plato makes the point in the Meno that, you need perplexity and curiosity, right, to pursue knowledge. Because the more you're perplexed, the more you're curious about things, the more likely you are to pursue new ideas, right? Just like Mill talks about, with happiness, and in utilitarianism, he says, human beings, a dissatisfied human being is better off than a satisfied pig, right? Because through our dissatisfaction, we can identify what's wrong in the world, what we need to improve upon, right? And we can make improvements. We can imagine better situations and work towards them. So I think maybe it is like it's a byproduct of like our ability to keep going, to adapt our environment, to imagine better circumstances. We need to be dissatisfied. We need to look around the world and say, that could be fixed. This could be better. But I think the problem maybe is that this has gotten skewed. Because, if you think about that, so looking around the world and saying, this could be fixed, there's so many things that could be fixed, right? But we've kind of like, there's so many problems maybe, we are aware of so much that we have a hard time focusing on the maybe most pressing ones, and we look at the biggest kind of issues, or we just reduce it to money and income or something like that. I don't know. It's an interesting question.
Yeah. It kind of makes me think like, okay, so what if we stopped comparing? If everybody just stopped comparing, and then there would be no lack, and there would just be kind of a sense of complacency. Would we eventually just kind of die out as a species?
Because like mediocrity would be the norm kind of thing.
But I mean, mediocrity is just kind of what the general, the most people end up doing.
Yeah.
But in a sense of just like being completely satisfied where we are, then there's no stimulus to change. There's no stimulus to improve, because we're just feeling good, blissed out all the time, kind of.
Yeah, it's interesting because we were talking about this week, which has kind of motivated this topic also, right? And the idea that it's like, you can do well during a day, and then you look back on your day and evaluate it, and you all of a sudden feel dissatisfied because you didn't get enough done. You didn't get all the projects done that you wanted to that day. You didn't make enough headway. You hit a road bump or something, right? Or you're working on yourself and you feel like you let yourself down because you didn't work out long enough, or you didn't stick to the diet, right? It's almost like you're always like berating yourself to keep yourself going. And I think there is part of that, right? That this stress, this anxiety around how we're doing is because we think we need to be on a progression, an ascent all the time, essentially, right? I mean, that's how I kind of think of it. Like, if you think of your life as like a line graph, it needs to constantly go up.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're either growing or dying, like, right? You're growing or decaying. And I think maybe it's necessary. Maybe this comparison is necessary, because I look back at examples of my life when I became very dissatisfied with something, very unhappy about something. And it's those moments when I decided to make a change that has benefited my life in such a meaningful way.
Well, there is truth to that, right? I mean, I remember when I was at my most depressed, everything felt negative, bland. I had no motivation to do anything. And at the time, you convince yourself that change won't change anything. Even improvements won't improve the situation.
Yeah, the helplessness type of thing.
Yeah, you get into a state of helplessness, of victimization, that kind of idea. But once you make a change and you realize you can make a change, all of a sudden then things open up again. And there's the possibility of improvement and betterment and getting to a better point. And I think part of it is we all want better lives, always, right? We always want to be better. We want to be better at things that we do. We want to have more security. We want to be more comfortable. We want to have more pleasure. We want all these things we want more of, right? Which kind of makes sense because it keeps us moving forward. But maybe there's a problem there in how we're thinking. Maybe we're overemphasizing, like you said, maybe it's perspective. Maybe we're overemphasizing that side of it and not paying attention to living life. Not even enjoying. I mean, because there's a point at which you compare and you don't even enjoy what you're doing, because you're missing even your achievements, even the joys, because you're so focused on the improvement.
Yeah. So it might be more beneficial to figure out how can you skillfully use comparison.
Ooh.
Because it clearly is necessary for some. I mean, there was a long time where it was difficult for humanity to get food. It was, I mean, you could legitimately die because the harvest got
a bad
destroyed.
season, right?
Yeah,
The potato
yeah.
famine.
Yeah, you could legit die. Nowadays, that doesn't exist. So this dissatisfaction, these comparisons were somewhat necessary. So then the question comes, how can we nowadays use comparison to our benefit?
Oh. You know, maybe that's it too, right? If we look back and I know this is speculation, obviously, and kind of a thought experiment, but if we look back at previous times, and, you know, you were saying, right, like, you know, in earlier times, a famine or something could have happened because of a bad crop, whatever, and you could literally perish. So there is a need to look around your immediate environment and determine what needs to be done and do it. So, like, you know, okay, my roof's broken, I need to fix it because we won't make it through the winter, right? Or this crop's having trouble, we need to do something, otherwise it won't work out. But things are easier now. And so we tend to focus these comparisons on other things, right? Like improvements in life, like in terms of income, wealth, you know, whatever. So how do we use it then? How do we make this more valuable to us? So comparison could be maybe the birth of happiness if we change this, right? Ooh, look at that.
Dude, the whole Taoist thing, birth and death.
Yeah.
Coexisting simultaneously. Wow, that's cool. I like that comparison about comparisons even better than my previous comparison about comparisons.
It is a nice comparison.
No, that's actually a really great point because the comparisons can be a rebirth. We're continually in this process of death and rebirth.
Yeah. And you know, it's funny. Like, okay, I can remember being in college and, like, I would get stressed out about my papers because I wanted my work to come out. I wanted it to be the best I could produce, right? But you know how it is. You're on a short time. There's a lot of work to do, whatever. And I remember I would always, like, call my dad or something, and he'd be like, you know, just relax, take a step back, calm down. I'm like, yeah, but if I'm not stressed, I won't do it, and I won't do my best. And I always had that mentality that, like, if I don't worry about it, it won't get done. And that was a type of sort of comparison, right? And maybe that was like, I needed this pressure to produce. And maybe this is part of it. We have to rethink what we're comparing and why in order to use it without overwhelming ourselves or without becoming overtly negative. Mm-hmm. Because, you know, I think that part of the problem is, you know, like you mentioned this before, right? The idea that, you know, like, once I do X, I'll be happy. You know, you mentioned this numerous times. Like, once I become a vet, I'll be happy. You become a vet, I'm not happy. Right? You know, like, you know, and it's like, because we do that to ourselves, right? We think, well, once this goal is complete, that'll be it. Then I'll be happy. But the problem is, if you're not doing anything else, you're not changing anything really. You're adding to what you can do, but you're not really changing yourself. You're not changing how you look at the world. You're not changing anything that's going to help with happiness.
I blame it on fairy tales because they always end happily ever after. There's always like an end to them.
Such
happily
bullshit.
Ever after.
Yeah.
This happened happily ever after. So we're indoctrinated into this happily ever after thing, and then it never.
Well, isn't that like the
that
Disney
way.
fairy tale though? Weren't real ones really dark? I thought like the original fairy tales were like the super dark.
I'm not quite.
I don't know. Well, whatever. Okay.
Yeah, so that makes a good point, kind of figuring out what you're comparing yourself to. Because we've spoken about this before. Instead of comparing yourself to externals, comparing yourself to internals. So instead of saying, like, Elon Musk made this much money, how come I'm not doing that? I must be a piece of shit. Saying, hey, look at how much money I'm making now compared with how much money I was making 10 years ago, 20 years ago, something like that. Be like, holy cow, I'm doing really well. Or,
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Or like, how about my well-being? Compare my well-being now with a year ago, 5 years ago, maybe when I wasn't feeling so well, different things like that, and be like, wow, I'm doing really good. So, like, starting to look for comparisons that you can say, oh, this is something that's worked to my advantage. How can I continue doing this in the future?
I like that. You know, it's interesting because it's almost like, you know, when we look at where we were and where we are now, we can always find, I think we can almost always find things that we've improved upon, right? That we're doing better. But the trick is like, there's always going to be stuff we lack as well. And there's always going to be things we want that we don't have yet. And if we only focus on the negative, I think comparison will always work against us. It's almost like we need to figure out how to, like you said, look at what have we done, what are the positive achievements, and then what do we need to do now in the immediate to keep advancing in the way we want, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And you can even use external comparisons. Like, let's say Elon Musk has made a whole bunch of money and that's where you want to get to. Great. Use that external comparison, but use it as a waypoint. Not something to derive fulfillment or happiness from, but use it as a waypoint, saying, hey, here's a comparison. He's doing this, he's earning this. That's where I want to be. There's my waypoint. Now, I'm going to take a look at myself and compare where I am now with where I've been previously and where I want to be in the future, which is there. And how can I draw that line? And how can I fulfill that
The
prophecy?
goal? Yeah.
That goal. Yeah.
Make it a self-fulfilling prophecy. Is that what you're trying to say?
Nah.
Yeah, it's funny too, because I think part of it is also like, when we don't have a clear idea of what we even want, I think this is also where comparison kills us. Because this is the issue. Really ask yourself, what do I actually want? Do I even know what I want? Because if I don't know what I want, I'm going to look at the world and I'm going to see myself as a failure in a ton of different ways. Because I have no idea what I'm even working towards.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the problem. Like, we have these vague ideas like, I want money. Well, what do I really want and how much money do I need? Because that would really dictate it, right? I'm not going to just earn money for the sake of earning it, because that doesn't actually do anything. I need to kind of know what I actually am aiming at. We talked about this before, like, right? Having a vague goal doesn't get you anywhere.
Nope.
It leads to misery. So what do you think we need then to start making comparison work for us? What are some things we could do, I guess, or how should we look at essentially our progress without killing ourselves or missing out on the now? I think that's the other problem. We miss living life because we're so focused on these ends that we don't have, or these things that are later on.
Yeah. So I think so basically in anything you do, there's the actions and there's the results. And so oftentimes the lack comparisons will come from results, because they're very results oriented. Like, he's making so much money, they're so successful, they're so famous. Those are results. Those are things that no matter what, we have no control over. However, actions is something we totally, completely have control over. So we take a look at this person that's living the life we want. Let's look at the actions that they've done to get there, the actions that they're presently doing. And let's compare our actions with their actions, and then ramp up our actions to be similar to their actions. Because if we do that long enough, eventually we'll get those results.
Okay, I like that, right? So if we plan and if we have an idea of what we're aiming at, as long as we stick to it, we will get those results. And that is true. I think, people don't realize how true that is. That if you stick with something and you focus on something, you will see results.
If you stick with it for long enough, it's going to happen.
Yeah,
but most
it will
people
happen.
just give up too soon because the results didn't come fast enough.
Yeah, they didn't see that immediacy. And we've talked about this before too, that our expectations are very, I think, they're very much kind of perverted, because we expect everything so fast that we don't even understand that things, personal development, any kind of progress goals take time and they take work. And so I think understanding that can help kind of put perspective on the comparison, right? That I need to put the work in to get there too as well. It's not going to just magically appear. It's like this idea of like the lottery, right? I mean, I remember this week the lottery was up to like $1 billion or something. And every time I went to go to the convenience store, there was lines of people purchasing tickets. And I get the impulse. I get the impulse because it's like the shortest way, right, to that point. Like, I could get $1 billion, well, after taxes, like 300 million, whatever, but I could get that amount of money, this insane amount of money, just by purchasing a $2 ticket. So I get the impulse to do that, but it's really like, that shortcut is so rare, right? It's almost so unlikely. I think you have a better chance of getting struck by lightning numerous times.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But it's like, it's kind of funny. It's like, because it's like, we want that immediate fortune, right? Instead of putting the work in. We want the immediate results now rather than doing it and seeing the work. And I think we also miss out too on enjoying the process. And I think this is really a big problem for all of us, is we don't take the time to really enjoy what we're doing. And I think honestly, happiness, well-being, living a good life requires also like being aware that we're living and enjoying what we're doing, not always looking at the end goal, not always looking at what we have or don't have, but actually enjoying the process of what we're doing. Being happy that we ran into an obstacle and overcame it. Being happy that we're able to do something we want to do. You know, I mean, I think there is a lot of value in that we miss.
Yeah, enjoying the process is so important, because I look at a lot of really wealthy people I've been fortunate enough to meet and interview, and all of them are constantly building something. And a lot of people who aren't so wealthy will be like, well, if they were making that much money, why wouldn't they just go retire and sit on a beach? And I've done that. Retiring and sitting on a beach is fun for a month, maybe a couple months, but then it's boring as fuck.
Well, you know, it's probably fun at first because you were working really hard. Yeah. So it's like, okay, yeah, I get to enjoy the fruits of my labor, take a break, but it's like, yeah, do you really want to do that forever?
Yeah, it's just boring. There's no meaning in life. There's no accomplishment. These are like things that are very important for your well-being, and they're just not there if you're just sitting on a beach all the time. So enjoying the process, finding a process that you're going to enjoy. Like I remember, I think it was A Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, where he talks about no matter what, you're gonna have a shit sandwich. No matter what you're doing, there's gonna be a shit sandwich. So you might as well choose the shit sandwich that you want to eat.
Yeah, it makes sense. You might as well make that choice that it's something that you want to do. I mean, you look at a lot of successful people, and the fact is that they do like what they're doing, right? They enjoy the creative process. They are good in that area. Their niche that they're in, they're very good at, right? They're very skilled at. They understand it. And there is joy in just doing it, I think. And that's the important part, in solving the problems, in figuring out, you know, dealing with the stress. There's actually a pleasure in it, in overcoming the obstacles. And I think that's part of the trick, is finding what for us, you know, that thing is, that we can actually get engaged in a level where we are actually enjoying what we're doing.
Yeah. A lot of happiness, a lot of fulfillment comes from solving problems and actually choosing more difficult problems. And they actually say that, you know, your salary in life, how much you earn, your value comes from your ability to solve more difficult problems. Yeah. Because if the only problem you can solve is how to flip a burger, guess what? You're going to be making a minimum wage salary. But if you can solve really large problems, like how to design a really attractive electric car, you can make a lot more money.
You can, yeah. And you know, the other thing too is that's interesting, I think, is when we look at, you know, what we're actually doing, being engaged in it, being aware enough to enjoy it, I think it is hard to find, you know, I think what we want to do, because it always seems overwhelming sometimes. I mean, what would you suggest for people to kind of figure out what would work for them, I guess? Because I think that's part of this issue, right? Mm-hmm. I think it's taking the right perspective, being realistic in the sense of understanding that things take time. You have to put the work in. Yeah. And also trying to figure out what works for you.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is just to get started. We deal with so much analysis paralysis and overthinking everything, over-researching everything. Listen, you have no idea. Like they say, like your plans will not survive first contact with the enemy. And that's the same thing with everything in life. You have no idea until you get started. Like being a veterinarian, on paper, theoretically, I thought that would be the ideal job. Well, it didn't survive contact with the enemy. It's crazy, because what I imagined it to be and what it actually is two completely different things. You know, I had some like fantasy type of James Herriot type thing in my mind, and it's nothing like that. Absolutely nothing like that. But that's why getting in there and doing something is so important. It doesn't matter if what you're doing is going in the opposite direction of where you're eventually going to end up. Because you're going to get feedback from doing that, and you're going to be able to adjust and to get closer and to actually move in the direction of where you will go. But if you stay still, if you just research and find out more stuff and just be stuck, you're just going to stay stuck.
You're just going to be stuck, yeah. And you know, I think it's important too what you mentioned there, you know, like I love teaching. There's always going to be parts of your job that you don't like, though. And there's lots of parts of it that I do not like. But, you know, I think it's also finding the things that you do like, because that will also help you understand what you want to do. And, you know, recognizing that you have time also to try other things. But I think you're right. The most important thing is just doing it, because you can paralyze yourself in so many ways by researching, looking what others did, because really you're not going to just model it on somebody else. You're going to do it your own way. And once you start, you will learn because you'll be in it. You're in the thick of it. We learn the best when we try. And then you also know what problems you need to solve. Yeah. You can theorize I can imagine just endless problems. I mean, even teaching, if I was going to make a new course, I could imagine right now millions of problems. But I also know, because I've done it, that most of them are just not going to happen. And they're not necessary, or I know a way around them. The real problems are going to be the ones that I confront in actually doing it.
Yeah, I love what you say with finding out what you're good at. Like, it's trying to determine what your gift is, and that's what you can do better than anybody else with the least amount of effort. It's almost like that's what you were put here on Earth to do. Like, you owe the universe that, because you can do that better than anybody else with the least amount of effort, and that is what you should be doing. But guess what? It's hard to find out. You have to try a whole bunch of stuff. Like, if you haven't found it out yet, you haven't tried enough stuff.
Yeah, that's probably true, right? And also, like, I think a lot of times you'll find a natural sort of enjoyment in doing it almost, right?
It'll be fulfilling because you'll be good at it. It'll be rewarding, both financially and emotionally. You'll just get so much satisfaction from doing that because it's like it rewards you from just doing it.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things a lot of us struggle with too is, when we aren't on the right path, we're making these comparisons that are killing our happiness. But it seems impossible to make the transition to the right path, right? To change. And I've seen a lot of people struggle with this. I've struggled with this, right? When you want to change your life course, is very difficult. There's a lot of things to consider, a lot of things to keep in mind. You need to eat, you need a living, right? So I think in order to kind of redirect your life too, you have to start taking chances. Even if it's like starting something on the side at night, using a couple hours at night and doing something new that you think you might want to do just to get more experience and try it, right? At least you're doing it. And then you can leverage those skills and see what happens with it moving forward. It gives you the opportunity later on that you would otherwise not have if you don't do anything with it.
Yeah. Tim Ferriss talked about this in his book, how he basically made an assignment for all of his people who are in an entrepreneurship program. And he said, hey, if you contact a successful person, I don't know, it may have been the president or something like that, the first person who contacts them will get a around the world trip. And this was people at an Ivy League university. And he was like, they had all the firepower in the world, but no one was brave enough to pull the trigger. And then he did the same thing with some other people, and he just told them, nobody pulled the trigger, and then everybody just pulled the trigger. And guess what? They all got it. But it's just like everybody wants to be a success before doing the actions. But the thing is, you have to do the actions before success will come. It's like saying to a fireplace, give me warmth and then I'll put the wood in. It just doesn't make sense. Like, you have to put the wood in first. You have to do the work first. You have to be brave enough to pull the trigger first, and then eventually you'll get the reward.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this before, right? It's like, any idea is worthless until it's put into action. And this is really, I think,
there's a really smart person who had this quote that said what is it? Damn it, I forgot my quote. But it's something about the road to mediocrity is paved with good ideas.
Yeah, that's what it was.
I
really
like that smart person who said that quote.
It was brilliant. I like it. Yeah, and it's true, right? Because look, if you don't put anything into action, you can't complain, but we're kind of like, it's almost like all these people are complaining and making these comparisons, but really there's no basis for it. Because if you're not putting in the work, you're not trying anything. And I think this is what's crucial. We are creative beings. I think we are good. Human beings are pretty amazing problem solvers. You look at what we've solved problem-wise over history, or even just in your own life, the problems you've solved. It's incredible. The ways we figure out how to do things, how to make it work, and use that. I think that's what we're made to do. We're made to create, we're made to solve problems, we're made to make this life meaningful for us in some way. And I really think meaning comes through sort of envisioning or realizing yourself in the world, right? Manifesting your powers in reality by doing. I think that's really where, our well-being and our happiness stem from.
Mm-hmm. But it's not going to be easy. It's not. It's simple, but it's not easy. And that's the thing. Like, Les Brown has a saying that if you do what is easy, your life will be hard. But if you do what is hard, your life will be easy. And that's the thing. Like, actually putting in the work, it's not easy. You have to do work.
Yeah, you have to work at it.
But it's so rewarding because when you get there, that's a place that was worth so much more than the actual work you had to put in.
Yeah, it's funny. I like Nietzsche says, right, that when he talks about will to power, he says, what is happiness? It's the accumulation of power. It's a recognition that my power is growing, that I'm getting stronger. And I always like that because, he's talking about that we have a will. We have an ability to create, to act. It's taking control of our lives. It's being proactive. It's overcoming obstacles, overcoming ourselves, overcoming our fears. All of that is expanding our power. It's growing in power, our ability to keep doing in the world, right? To act and to make what we want happen. And I think that is a good way to look at it because really, I think comparison kills us. It is the death of happiness when we make sort of vague or arbitrary external comparisons that lead to inaction, that defeat us or are an excuse so that we don't have to act. And I think a lot of this is victimhood or looking for an excuse. Oh, they have so much money. Oh, their parents were wealthy and left them $400 million. I'll never get that. I guess I shouldn't do anything.
Yeah, because that's the easy thing to do.
Yeah.
But I love how you said the developing of power, because that is a comparison with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a worthwhile comparison. But if you look outside to the victimhood type thing, that's a worthless comparison.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, right? He's all about, really, it's self-development. So it's looking at, how am I accumulating? How am I making myself better? Because nobody's going to do it for me. No one's going to live my life. No one's going to make this easy for me, and it's not like we have to be against each other, but the reality is you have to do it yourself or nothing's going to happen. And I think, the difficulty we struggle with is manyfold, obviously, It's finding something meaningful. It's finding meaning in life, finding a path, and working towards it. But working on yourself is the best way to get there, I think. And finding out what you can do to overcome the things in your life and act.
Yeah. And even with working towards it. So, like, one of the biggest problems people have when they have a new puppy is training it. And training a dog, unless it's a golden retriever, it takes work. Golden retrievers just come pre-trained. But pretty much any dog, it takes work. But what I tell people is, I say, listen, it's not some big marathon project that you have to do every day. It's 5 minutes, but 5 minutes every day. And do it at a time of day when you can do it reliably. Like right after you have breakfast, 5 minutes, do it. Or right before you have dinner, 5 minutes, do it. Something so that every day it'll be a reminder to do it, because that's putting in the work. And guess what? You do 5 minutes a day for a month, that's over 2 hours that you've put in training. And the best part is that the training compounds on itself. Dogs learn through repetition, and I'm pretty sure that's the same way it works for people.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Where we learn much better through repetition than from just time spent slogging through something. So if you want to get somewhere and you want to put in the work, just start with 5 minutes a day. You can always do more, but start with 5 minutes a day. Everybody has 5 minutes.
I like that you brought up there too. And I like the analogy with training a puppy because it's something that's very easy to understand. It's 5 minutes of quality time a day scheduled. So it's always the same. It always happens at the same time. You can expect it every day, right? And that does apply to us. Because you're right, if you just sit down and say, I'm going to do research, and you just research, and you just research, you don't really have a goal. You have no aim. You're not really doing anything. You're kind of wasting time. It's like you're twiddling your thumbs, right? If you have a goal and you spend a few minutes a day doing it, you will see progress. And you might spend more time, but the important thing is to have a schedule and work at it, right? Because it is habitual. We have to create these habits to create the self that we want. I mean, Aristotle, the virtue ethicists thought that very much, that, all of our character traits come through habit. They come through repetition, doing it over and over again until it becomes part of who we are. And you see this in a lot of things we do, right? I mean, we get into the habit of our morning commute. We get into, I'll just use college as an example. I remember going to classes. The first couple days, I didn't know where my classes were. I had to look at my schedule. I had to figure it out. Within a week or two, I knew exactly where I was going at what time, right? Just like your morning commute, you might use GPS at first to try and get there, to figure it out. And then before you know it, you don't even need it. You're listening to podcasts, you're hanging out because you know exactly where you're going, right? It's habituation. It becomes part of your routine. And when you can make positive things part of your routine, I think that's where you start to be able to really make good comparisons against yourself. And that's where comparison, I think, can become a very positive thing in life.
Yeah. And also another point that I want to point out about this 5 minutes every day, it's twofold. So one, there's this, it's kind of like a rocket ship taking off. How like when every time there's a space shuttle launch, it uses up 90% of its fuel just trying to break out of the barrier, like break gravity initially. That's where it uses most of its fuel.
You're going to get there eventually.
Yeah.
And you have a physics degree. It's crazy.
I know. I know. Don't tell anyone.
Break through that thing that's heavy.
Don't tell everyone I work for NASA. I don't think they want to know.
Oh, God. Yeah, I forgot about that. Jesus Christ.
So, yeah, brain's a little foggy today. But anyways, it uses up most of its fuel just to break through gravity initially. Well, it's the same thing with trying to do any new task. It's the hardest part is that first 5 to 15 minutes. So if you just get on task for 5 to 15 minutes, that's going to be the hardest time doing it. Because here's what's going to happen. Either that day is just going to be a difficult day and then you've done what you need to do that day, or you're going to actually break through that and then it's going to take no energy whatsoever and you'll just keep on going and going and going. So that's the half of it. The other half is just doing it every day, because we know to make a habit, you have to do it over and over and over again. There are different things. They say, 21 days or 60 days or however long it is, it doesn't matter, because you do it enough and eventually anytime you don't do it, you're like, hey, something's not right. So those two things, just getting on task, doing the work. Time on task is a bigger predictor of success than IQ, than money, than anything else. Just time on task is what will actually produce success.
I like what you're saying there too, because it's a directed task, right? You have a plan of what you want to do. It's getting it done. And I think, this is also our problem, right? You sit down to do something, you imagine all these people that got this thing done already, and it seems like your work is pointless, right? But if you look at it instead as, this is what I want to do today, I'm going to complete this, you complete it, and you're done, and you have something positive to look at. You have growth. And that will accumulate into something accomplished, right, over time. Writing 200 words a day will eventually lead to a book. Writing, as long as it's goal-oriented and directed at some end, at some overarching project. And I think this is our problem. We go in with such vague ideas, and then we make these comparisons to already completed success stories, that we're missing a huge part of this puzzle, which is all the work, all the effort, all the time, and the energy spent on just making the thing happen and actually putting it into practice.
So then even though comparison is the death of happiness, maybe comparison is essential.
I think it is, right? I think the problem is, it's like everything else, right? And it's like you said very early on, it's perspective. I think a lot of times we go into things with the wrong perspective. We go in defeatist. And in a way, we almost want to be defeated because we really don't want to put the work in. We want an excuse. We want something to blame.
We're just lazy.
Yeah, right?
We're just plain lazy.
Call it whatever you want. The fact is, it is kind of like laziness, right? It's not. We want these magical goals to happen. We want this magical life, but we don't want to do anything. And we're upset when we look at all these examples of people that succeeded, but there's a lot of work involved and we're not doing it. So why should we expect it? And why would we even make the fucking comparison in the first place? When you think about it, it makes no sense. I think, really with comparison, we have to start, if we use it to our advantage, I think it can very much help us. Because it does make sense. It does. Comparing ourselves to what we're accomplishing in our own lives, to our own goals, to what's meaningful for us, can motivate us, can help us see the progress we're making, realize it, and enjoy the process, I think. But comparison turned against us, looking at the external as a means to not act, as a means to sort of give ourselves an excuse, to blame the world, that is always going to kill happiness. And it's going to lead to a miserable life.
Yeah,
it seems like that's the case, right?
Yeah, I think one thing that just popped up in my mind is, so you can compare externally and internally. Well, how about this? When you're comparing internally with yourself, compare results, because you can see that you're producing more now than you were, or you can also see that you're producing less. But when you're comparing externally, compare actions. These people who have what you want, compare your actions with their actions. And if you're doing the same or more actions for long enough and you're not getting the same results, then yeah, fine, be dissatisfied. But until you're actually doing that, realize that the only thing holding you back is you.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is what's crucial, right? And it is difficult because the same thing that works for the other person may not work for you too. That's the other problem. It's finding out what you need and what works for you, but it's putting in the work to do that. And it's not easy. But I think the interesting thing is that once you commit to it, and you will start to see progress. And once you do, I think the comparisons get better and it's easier to take the right perspective. It is hard when you're not doing anything though, because the world does seem against you because you're not active, right? When you're not using your own willpower, the world is against you because you're letting it be against you. You're not making any effort to change it. It's like everything else. It is difficult, but we have more power than we think. I think, human beings can do a lot. We can do almost anything if we just do it. But we sort of cripple ourselves in so many ways with fear, concerns, expectations, just everything really. We can turn the world against us or turn it in our favor. And we talked about that before too. Does the universe work with me or against me? And really that's all a matter of perspective, positivity, and learning to look at things the right way.
Yep. Agreed.
Yeah.
So,
all right.
I think that's good for comparison. The death of happiness. It's important and it can be crippling.
It can, yeah. I mean, it's like anything else, right? I think anything else in our lives, when we want to progress, we have to at the end of the day, we have to put the effort in. I mean, it's our lives, right?
You have to be skillful. It's like I really love this thing you were talking about, the virtues, how there's a virtue and a vice, and you have to find the golden mean. It's like anything else. Comparison has a virtue and a vice, and you have to use it skillfully in order to make the best of it.
To make it work and make it lend to your happiness rather than taking away from it.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny too. I like that because Aristotle, all his philosophers always talked about how wisdom, knowledge, and like really using things in the right way was the way to get the value out of them, right? If you don't have wisdom, money can hurt you. If you don't use it correctly, if you don't have skill, it will hurt you because you'll blow it, you'll make bad investments, right? It's all about having the right frame of mind and also being proactive. That's what will get us the things we want.
Yeah, because even intelligence, it doesn't, you have to find the golden mean. Like I remember when I was a kid, there was this kid who was labeled a genius. I mean, he was brilliant, but he shit his pants and then wore those pants for multiple days in a row.
Oh God!
And so it's finding the golden mean.
yeah, right. That's a good example.
What an example, right?
Jesus,
yeah, what an example. And it wasn't the story of me, by the way.
Oh, good. Thank God. Whew. It's funny too because I think also they talk about it. Actually, it's interesting with addiction. Like people that are very intelligent with addiction, they actually sometimes have a harder time getting over it because they justify it. And they find lots of rationalizations to keep working towards their negative behavior. Mm-hmm. So it's like, it's finding the balance, it's finding what works for you, and it's acting. I think those are the crucial things. And learning to find the right perspective, enjoy the process, and compare against yourself results. That's what's important.
Yep. Amen.
All right.
So, great episode today, Danny.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys for listening. Make sure to like, subscribe, click the notification bell, leave comments.
All that stuff.
Email us.
Share.
Send money.
Great. Anything. Yeah, it's helpful too.
Yeah, always. All right. Thank you guys so much. Have a good one. We'll see you next week.
All right. Take care.